Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going deep with Good Strategy, Bad Strategy.
The Difference and Why It Matters by Richard Rumelt.
Yeah, a book that's actually gotten quite a bit of praise
It really has, yeah.
from a pretty wide range of people. I mean, everyone from, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies
Business school
to
professors.
business school
Yes,
professors.
but it's clarity,
Yeah.
Just it's no-nonsense approach to strategy.
I think what I found so captivating about it was it's not just about defining what makes a strategy good,
Yeah.
but it actually actively helps you spot bad strategy.
It equips you to do that. And frankly, you find it lurking in a lot more places than you'd think.
Exactly. And this deep dive is going to try to give you the essence of all 18 chapters, even if you haven't, had the chance to read the book yourself.
Yeah. I think Rumelt structured this book in a way to really build the understanding.
Right.
So we're going to start with a clear definition of what good strategy is, and then we're going to kind of unpack the common pitfalls of bad strategy. And then from there, explore how to actually diagnose a situation, to set the right objectives, and design, a coherent plan of action.
And he doesn't just talk theory, though. You'll hear real-world examples from companies like Apple, Walmart, historical events, the Gulf War, even like insightful looks at how these things play out in a simple corner grocery store.
Yeah, I think that's one of the coolest things about this book. He brings these concepts down to earth, so it's applicable to, listeners in any walk of life, not just, high-level executives.
Right.
So we're going to be looking at the importance of focus, how to approach growth strategically, and how to adapt to change. All of this, of course, resting on the foundation of knowledge and learning. And just, I think, clear thinking.
Okay, so just to set the stage here, we've got 18 chapters. Chapter 1 is Good Strategy is Unexpected. Chapter 2 is Discovering Power. Chapter 3 is Bad Strategy. Chapter 4 is Why So Much Bad Strategy. Chapter 5, The Kernel of Good Strategy. Chapter 6 is Anticipation. Chapter 7, A Guiding Policy. Chapter 8, Coherence. Chapter 9, Using Leverage. Chapter 10, Proximate Objectives. Chapter 11, Chains that Unravel. Chapter 12, Dynamics. Chapter 13, Inertia and Entropy. Chapter 14, Focus. Chapter 15, Growth. Chapter 16, Using Advantage. Chapter 17, Riding the Waves of Change. And finally, Chapter 18, Keeping Your Head.
Wow, 18 chapters.
Yeah, it's a meaty book.
Yeah.
But really well written.
Very digestible, yeah. And I think each chapter kind of has a specific goal. So that first chapter, Good Strategy is Unexpected, really kind of aims to blow up any preconceived notions you have about what strategy means.
Right.
Chapter 2 is all about uncovering those unexpected sources of power that you have. Then we have Chapter 3, Dissecting What Makes a Strategy Bad.
Yeah.
And then Chapter 4, tackling that all too common question of why bad strategy is so pervasive. Chapter 5 lays out, the core, what Rumelt calls the kernel of good strategy.
Okay, so establishing the foundation, what about the rest of the chapters?
So Chapter 6 emphasizes the critical role of anticipation. So understanding the actions and reactions of others. Chapter 7 delves into creating a guiding policy to give your actions direction.
Yeah.
Chapter 8 is all about making sure those actions work together in a coherent way. Chapter 9 gets into how to actually leverage your resources and strengths for maximum impact. And then Chapter 10 introduces this concept of proximate objectives. So breaking those big goals into manageable steps.
Wow, we're already halfway through.
Yeah.
What can our listeners expect from the last 8?
Okay, so Chapter 11 looks at what he calls chain-linked problems. So that difficulty of achieving lasting change.
Right.
Chapter 12 explores strategic thinking and dynamic, ever-changing situations.
Right.
Chapter 13 digs into inertia and entropy.
Well, those are good.
So the forces that resist change. Chapter 14 highlights the importance of focus. 15 examines the complexities and potential pitfalls of growth.
Okay.
Chapter 16 is all about using any competitive advantage you have to its fullest. Chapter 17 tackles riding the waves of change.
Right.
And Chapter 18 wraps up with insights on staying clear-headed when the pressure's on.
So it's fascinating to see how all these seemingly kind of disparate ideas are actually all kind of woven together, right? It's not just a list of tips. It's a whole kind of way of approaching challenges and opportunities.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you'll find that, the real power of this book comes from how it challenges conventional wisdom.
Right.
And offers a truly fresh perspective on strategic thinking.
Okay, enough overview. Let's jump right in. Chapter 1, Good Strategy is Unexpected.
Yeah.
Rumelt kicks off with a historical example, Lord Nelson's totally unexpected approach at the Battle of Trafalgar.
Love this example.
Yeah, it's such a good one.
It's a perfect illustration of how good strategy often defies, the obvious.
Right.
So picture this. It's 1805. Napoleon's armies are on the march. England's fate hangs on controlling the seas. Off the coast of Spain, you have this massive combined French and Spanish fleet, clashing with a smaller British force led by Lord Nelson. Now, at that time, the standard naval tactic was to line up your ships and just blast away at each other from a distance.
Predictable. Straightforward, not very creative.
Precisely. But Nelson had a different plan. He split the British fleet into 2 columns and rammed them straight into the enemy line, breaking it apart. It was an incredibly audacious move that went against all the accepted naval doctrine of the time.
Wait, wasn't that, like, a huge risk? Like, strategically suicidal?
On the surface, yes. But Nelson had carefully analyzed the situation. He knew that the opposing fleet wasn't as well trained or as disciplined as his own. He also knew that the rough seas would make their cannons less accurate.
So you took what seemed like a weakness, the rough seas, turned it into an advantage, and by breaking the line, he disrupted their carefully laid plans.
Exactly. His unconventional approach threw the enemy off balance and led to a decisive British victory, with minimal losses for his own side.
Wow.
Tragically, Nelson was killed in the battle.
Oh, yeah.
But his victory secured British naval dominance for decades
Right.
and cemented his legacy as, a military genius.
That's incredible.
And what's fascinating is that Rumelt uses this example to highlight a core principle of good strategy.
Right.
It's not about blindly following a formula or set of rules.
Right.
It's about understanding those critical factors in a situation and crafting a unique approach that addresses them head on.
Right. You have to look at what you have
Mm-hmm.
and devise a plan from that, right?
Exactly.
So good strategy isn't about being predictable. It's about being adaptable, innovative, and willing to challenge, the status quo.
Yeah, I like how you put that.
It's like throwing a curveball when everyone's expecting a fastball.
Exactly. And Rumelt contrasts this with, the dramatic downfall of Lehman Brothers, who followed this strategy of growth at all costs, even when the warning signs were flashing all around them.
This was during the lead up to the 2008 financial crisis, right?
Yeah, absolutely. They just kept taking on riskier and riskier deals. Even as other firms were starting to pull back, they were so focused on growing their portfolio that they just failed to assess the underlying risks.
Right.
And as we all know, their collapse triggered a cascade of events that led to a global financial meltdown.
Yeah. So ambition without a sound strategy can be disastrous, even for, a giant firm like Lehman Brothers.
It's a cautionary tale. But the dangers of confusing ambition with actual planning.
Yeah.
And then Rumelt brings us to kind of this incredible turnaround of Apple under Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
It's a story we all know, but he focuses on the early days.
Right.
Not the later triumphs of the iPod and the iPhone and all that.
So not the flashy kind of product launches, but the groundwork that made them possible.
Exactly. Initially, Jobs' strategy was all about survival.
Mm-hmm.
He had to shrink the company, cut costs, focus on a core that could weather the storm.
Right.
It wasn't glamorous, but it was essential.
It reminds me of that saying, sometimes you have to take a step back to take 2 steps forward.
That's a great analogy. And even I was surprised by Jobs' later moves.
Right.
No one could have predicted the iPod, the iPhone, that whole ecosystem that he built. It was just this brilliant example of adapting to changing market conditions, anticipating future trends.
Right. It shows that good strategy is dynamic. It evolves over time. It surprises.
It keeps everyone on their toes.
Okay, so we've seen a historical military example, modern business cautionary tale, a glimpse into one of the most successful tech companies of all time. What else does Rumelt bring to the table in this first chapter?
Well, he also touches on this idea that a good strategy often needs to create a new market or redefine an existing one. He uses the example of Nintendo's Wii console. They didn't try to compete head-on with the more powerful PlayStation and Xbox. Instead, they created a whole new category of gaming focused on accessibility and family fun.
Right. Something that the other two weren't doing.
Yeah. And it was unexpected.
Yeah.
It was brilliant.
Right. Okay, on to chapter 2, Discovering Power. This chapter delves into finding those sort of unexpected sources of power within any given situation. Rumelt opens with another military example, General Schwarzkopf's strategy during the 1991 Gulf War.
Oh, this is a classic example of leveraging unexpected advantages.
Yeah.
So remember Saddam Hussein's army was dug in Kuwait?
Right.
The media was just saturated with images of trenches, predictions of a bloody, drawn-out ground war.
Everyone was bracing for another World War I, right?
Exactly, and all the military experts
Yeah.
were citing historical battles where frontal assaults led to massive casualties.
Yeah.
But Schwarzkopf had a completely different plan.
He wasn't playing the game everyone expected him to play.
Not at all. He launched this massive air campaign to weaken the Iraqi defenses. And then while the world's attention was focused on, the troops amassed near Kuwait,
Yeah.
he secretly moved a huge force west, deep into the desert.
Okay, so he used the media's focus to his advantage, creating like a smokescreen for his real intentions.
Exactly.
That's brilliant.
It was. And when the ground war started, this force, hundreds of thousands strong, swept north and then east, hitting the Iraqi flank hard.
So from behind.
Yeah. And at the same time, he ordered the Marines to advance slowly into Kuwait from the south, essentially drawing the Iraqi forces out of their defenses.
And right into Schwarzkopf's trap.
Exactly.
So that left hook was unexpected
Oh.
and incredibly effective. I'm starting to see how this idea of unexpected power plays out.
And it's not just about military tactics. Rumelt brings this down to earth with the example of Walmart's early success. Most people just attribute it to their size and their buying power.
Right.
But there's more to the story.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What was their real secret?
So it was a shift in thinking about discount retailing. Walmart saw each individual store not as a standalone unit, but as part of a network, a system.
So it's about connections, about leveraging the power of a well-coordinated system.
Exactly. And they combined this network thinking with innovations in logistics and supply chain management, things that were unheard of at the time. They could get products from suppliers to shelves faster and more efficiently than anyone else.
And that allowed them to offer lower prices and better service than their rivals.
Precisely. It's a great example of how even a seemingly simple strategy, like being a low-cost provider, actually requires a lot of strategic thinking and careful orchestration behind the scenes.
This is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because these examples make you think, how can I find those unexpected sources of power in my own life, my own work?
Absolutely. That's the real power of Rumelt's insights, I think.
Right.
They challenge you to think beyond the obvious and see things from a fresh perspective.
Okay. On to chapter 3, bad strategy.
All right.
Now that we've seen good strategy in action,
Yes.
let's talk about what not to do.
Oh, this is where Rumelt's writing really shines, I think.
Yeah.
He doesn't just describe good strategy.
Yeah.
He dissects the very anatomy of bad strategy.
Uh-huh.
And it's often surprisingly recognizable. Like, oh, I've seen this before.
So what are the hallmarks of a bad strategy? What should we be on the lookout for?
Well, bad strategy often avoids making those tough choices we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
It relies on vague goals, fluffy templates, and mistakes ambition for actual planning.
Right. It's all talk and no action.
Right.
Like setting a goal to be the best without any concrete plan for how to achieve it.
Exactly. Rumelt gives this example of the Digital Equipment Corporation.
DEC.
DEC, yeah. They were a pioneer in the early computer industry, but they ultimately failed to adapt to the rise of, personal computers.
What was their fatal flaw?
Their strategy, if you can even call it that, was to do it all. They tried to compete in every market segment, from mainframes to mini computers to PCs. They spread themselves thin and never developed a clear focus.
So lack of focus is a red flag.
Yeah.
What else should we be looking out for?
Rumelt shares this hilarious anecdote about a consultant who was brought in to help a company develop a strategy. And this consultant's big idea was visioning.
Oh, I hate that word.
He spent all of his time talking about, these big abstract goals, but never addressed the practicalities of how to actually achieve them.
Right. It sounds like he was more focused on creating the illusion of progress than actual tangible results.
Yeah, exactly. And this brings up kind of a crucial question that Rumelt asks. Are you focused on achieving measurable results?
Right.
Or are you just creating the conditions that you hope will lead to success?
Right.
It's a subtle but important distinction.
Yeah, so we need to be wary of fancy words and grand pronouncements. Actionable plans are key.
Exactly.
Okay, on to chapter 4. Why so much bad strategy? This is a question I think we've all asked ourselves at some point.
Yeah.
Why does bad strategy seem to be so pervasive?
Rumelt breaks it down into a few key factors. One is the simple avoidance of difficult choices.
Right.
It's human nature, right, to shy away from conflict. And making those tough decisions, that might ruffle feathers or alienate people.
Right. It's easier to go with the flow, even if that flow is leading you in the wrong direction.
Exactly. And another factor is this allure of those simplistic templates we talked about earlier. Fill in the blanks.
Right.
Create a vision statement, a mission statement, list your values, and voila,
You have strategy.
you supposedly have a strategy, but it's a hollow strategy, you know?
Lacking substance and real insight.
Precisely. It's a shortcut. That avoids the hard work of truly analyzing the situation and developing a unique and tailored approach.
So we need to be wary of those easy-button solutions, those one-size-fits-all frameworks that promise a quick fix.
Right, absolutely. And then Rumelt also points to the belief in positive thinking as a substitute for real action.
Okay.
You know, this idea that if you just believe hard enough, you can achieve anything.
Yeah, I'm all for optimism,
Sure.
but I can see how that can become, a problem. Like
Yeah.
focusing more on visualizing success than actually doing the work to achieve it.
You know, that's exactly the danger that Rumelt highlights. And he kind of traces this back to the New Thought movement, which emphasizes positive thinking and visualization. While those things can be helpful, they're not a substitute for a solid plan and a willingness to grapple with the messy realities of the situation.
Right, so it's about balancing optimism with realism. Believing in your goals, but also understanding the obstacles
Yeah, absolutely.
and developing a concrete plan to overcome them.
It's about having that clear-eyed view of the world, you know,
Yeah.
with the opportunities and the challenges.
Right, right. This is a great reminder to be skeptical of overly simplistic solutions.
Yeah.
And to remember that good strategy requires both thought and action.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's move on to Chapter 5, the kernel of good strategy.
Okay.
We've talked about what good strategy isn't. Now, what are the essential ingredients of a good strategy?
Okay, this is where Rumelt lays out the foundation.
Yeah.
He calls it the kernel of good strategy. And it has 3 key elements: a diagnosis,
Okay.
a guiding policy, and coherent action.
Okay, let's break those down. What exactly is the diagnosis part?
Okay, so the diagnosis is all about understanding the situation you're in. It's like a doctor diagnosing a patient. Before prescribing treatment, you have to understand the root cause of the problem, not just the symptoms.
Right, so you have to identify the core challenge.
Right. And Rumelt emphasizes that, you know.
A
good diagnosis should offer a theory as to why the problem exists. This deeper understanding will help you develop a more targeted and effective solution.
Okay, so you've diagnosed the problem. What's next?
Next comes the guiding policy. And this is where you define how you're going to compete.
Right.
So your overall approach to achieving your goals.
So it's not just about setting a goal. It's about outlining the path you'll take to reach that goal.
Exactly. And Rumelt contrasts this with a vision statement, which is often, you know, too vague and aspirational.
Right.
A guiding policy is more concrete, more actionable.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. He uses the example of George Kennan's containment policy during the Cold War.
Okay.
So Kennan diagnosed the problem. As the expansionist ambitions of the Soviet Union, his guiding policy was to contain their influence and prevent it from spreading further.
So a clear diagnosis led to a clear guiding policy, which then shaped specific actions.
Right.
Created a framework for making decisions.
Exactly. And the guiding policy helps to resolve any ambiguity within an organization, making sure everyone's pulling in the same direction.
Okay, and finally, what is coherent action?
Coherent action is all about making sure all your actions work together, that they're coordinated and mutually reinforcing. It's not just about doing a bunch of things. It's about doing them in a way that creates synergy and amplifies their impact.
So it's like a well-choreographed dance.
Yeah.
Each step flows smoothly into the next, building towards a larger goal.
That's a great way to put it. And Rumelt emphasizes that even a seemingly simple strategy, like being a low-cost producer, requires aligning many actions and policies to be effective.
It's not just about cutting costs in one area. It's about creating a system, a culture that supports that overall goal.
Exactly. That's the essence of coherence.
Okay, we've laid out the kernel of a good strategy. Let's move on to Chapter 6, anticipation. What's the key insight here?
Okay, so this chapter emphasizes that good strategy requires anticipating the actions and reactions of others. It's not just about focusing on your own moves. It's about understanding how your actions will impact your rivals, your customers, the market,
Yeah.
even the broader environment.
So it's about thinking ahead, playing chess, not checkers.
Exactly. And Rumelt uses the example of Hannibal's, stunning victory
Yeah.
at the Battle of Cannae.
Another military example. I'm ready for this.
This is a great one. So Hannibal was this brilliant Carthaginian general who faced off against the mighty Roman army. At Cannae, he completely outmaneuvered the Romans, luring them into a trap and inflicting a crushing defeat.
How did he do that? I mean, the Romans were known for their military prowess.
So Hannibal understood the Roman mindset.
Right.
He knew they were confident, even arrogant, and that they favored aggressive tactics. He used this to his advantage. He feigned a retreat, drawing the Roman legions into the center of his lines, and then surrounded them with his more mobile forces.
So he anticipated their actions and used their own strengths against them.
Exactly. It was, and this highlights the importance of not just knowing your own strengths, but also understanding the motivations and likely actions of others.
So we need to put ourselves in a rival's shoes, try to anticipate their next move. But it's not just about competitors, right?
Yeah.
It's about customers, suppliers, regulators.
You got it.
All of them.
And Rumelt also shares this fascinating story about Pierre Wack, a Shell executive who pioneered the use of scenario planning.
Okay, what is scenario planning? I've heard the term, but I'm not sure I fully understand it.
So scenario planning is about developing multiple possible futures, exploring different ways a situation could unfold.
Right.
It's not about predicting the future with certainty, but about being prepared for a range of possibilities.
So instead of betting everything on a single prediction, you develop a few different game plans based on how things might play out.
Exactly. And Wack was actually able to accurately predict the oil crisis of the 1970s, not by claiming to know the future, but by carefully analyzing trends and developing a range of plausible scenarios.
That's incredible. So anticipation is about both short-term tactical thinking and long-term strategic planning.
Exactly. It's about being adaptable, flexible, and always thinking one step ahead of the game.
Okay, let's move on to Chapter 7, a guiding policy.
Okay.
We touched on this earlier as part of the kernel of a good strategy. Can you expand on how a guiding policy differs from a vision statement? I think a lot of people get those confused.
It's a subtle but important difference. So a vision statement is often aspirational, painting a picture of, a desired future state. But a guiding policy is more about the how, the specific approach you'll take to achieve those aspirations.
So it's less about like dreaming big and more about creating like a roadmap for action. Like the difference between saying, I want to climb Mount Everest and actually planning the route, the training, the logistics, all that nitty-gritty stuff, that's actually going to get you there.
That's a perfect analogy. A good guiding policy provides clarity, it resolves ambiguity, and helps to align everyone in the organization around a common purpose. It's like that North Star that keeps everyone moving in the same direction.
You mentioned earlier that Rumelt uses Stephanie's grocery store as an example. Can you walk us through that?
Okay, so Stephanie owns this small grocery store in a college town, and she's facing a lot of challenges that are typical of a small business owner. She's competing with larger chains, trying to attract customers, manage costs, keep up with trends, all while keeping her employees happy and motivated.
Oh, I can relate. Sounds like she's got a lot on her plate.
She does. And Rumelt shows how a guiding policy can help her to make those tough decisions and develop a clear path forward.
What kind of guiding policy might she adopt?
It could be something like focusing on fresh, locally sourced produce. Or catering to the specific needs of, say, the large Asian student population in her neighborhood. The key is that it has to be tailored to her specific situation, her strengths, and the opportunities in her market.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where her unique capabilities meet the needs of her customers.
Exactly. And a guiding policy helps to communicate that clearly, both to her employees and to her customers. It provides that clarity of purpose.
Okay, on to Chapter 8, coherence.
Okay.
We briefly discussed this as part of the kernel of good strategy. Can you unpack why coherence is so crucial?
All right, so this chapter dives into this idea that the actions within a good strategy need to work together. They
Hmm.
need to be coordinated and mutually reinforcing. Rumelt uses the analogy of a simple feint and punch move in a fight
Okay.
to illustrate this.
So it's about creating like a combination,
Hmm.
a sequence of actions that build on each other.
Exactly. It's not just about throwing a bunch of punches randomly. It's
Hmm.
about setting up those punches with strategic movements that increase their impact.
And this applies to business as well.
Absolutely. So imagine a company that claims to be a low-cost provider,
Hmm.
but then invests heavily in fancy marketing campaigns
Right.
and luxurious office spaces.
Their actions are contradicting their stated strategy.
Mm.
They're sending mixed signals.
Exactly. That's a lack of coherence.
Hmm.
A truly coherent strategy would involve aligning every aspect of the business around that low-cost goal.
So everything from operations,
Yeah.
supply chains,
Mm-hmm.
to marketing, customer service, all of it needs to be aligned
Yeah.
with that core strategy.
Exactly. Everything working together to reinforce that core strategic focus.
So coherence is about creating a unified, integrated approach
Mm-hmm.
where all the pieces fit together seamlessly.
Exactly. It's about making sure all your actions are pulling in the same direction, amplifying each other's impact.
Okay, let's move on to chapter 9. Using leverage.
Right.
That's a big one. How do you create leverage in a competitive situation? How do you make the most of what you have?
That's the million-dollar question. And Rumelt introduces this concept of pivot points,
Okay.
places where a relatively small change can have a disproportionately large impact.
So it's about finding those pressure points where you could apply your force most effectively,
Mhm.
like finding the crack in the wall and focusing your energy there.
Exactly. It's about understanding the dynamics of the situation and finding those points where you can tip the scales in your favor.
Can you give us some real-world examples of this?
Sure, Rumelt talks about President Reagan's famous tear down this wall speech challenging Gorbachev and the Soviet Union directly.
Okay.
By calling them out so publicly, Reagan shifted the entire dynamic of the Cold War, putting immense pressure on Gorbachev to respond.
So he identified a key point of weakness, a point of leverage, and exploited it brilliantly. What other examples does Rumelt use?
He also talks about Kennedy's decision to launch the Apollo moon mission.
Okay.
This was a bold move that shocked the world. It signaled American ambition and technological prowess and put the Soviet Union on the defensive in the space race.
It was a seemingly symbolic gesture that had a huge strategic impact.
Exactly. And it's important to note that Kennedy didn't just set a lofty goal.
Mm-hmm.
He also laid out a clear path to achieving it with concrete steps and timelines.
So it wasn't just about, like, grand vision.
No.
It was about backing up that vision with a plan.
Yeah.
He created, like, momentum,
Mm-hmm.
a sense of urgency, and focused the nation's resources on achieving that goal.
Exactly. It's about creating a coherent set of actions that build on each other and create that leverage we're talking about.
Got it.
It's about understanding the system and finding those points where you can exert the most influence.
Okay, on to chapter 10, proximate objectives.
That's it.
What exactly is a proximate objective? I have to admit, it sounds a bit intimidating.
It's not as complicated as it sounds. A proximate objective is simply a short-term goal
Okay.
that is both achievable and directly contributes to your overall long-term vision.
So it's like a stepping stone, a way to break down a large, complex goal into smaller, more manageable pieces.
Exactly. And Rumelt emphasizes that in situations where the future is uncertain, it's especially important to focus on those proximate objectives,
Okay.
those things you can control and achieve in the short term.
It makes sense. When you're dealing with a lot of unknowns, it's easy to get overwhelmed and lose focus.
Yeah.
It's like trying to climb a mountain in one giant leap.
Right.
You need to break it down into smaller, achievable steps.
That's the idea. He uses the example of the Surveyor lunar lander, one of the early missions to the moon.
Okay.
One of the biggest challenges they faced was the uncertainty about the moon's surface.
Right.
They didn't know if it was powdery rocky or something in between.
I remember reading about that. It made designing the lander incredibly difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how could they know if the legs would sink or if it would tip over?
Exactly. And their proximate objective was to resolve that ambiguity,
Okay.
to get a clear understanding of the lunar surface before committing to a specific design.
So by achieving that proximate objective,
Mm-hmm.
they cleared a major obstacle for the entire mission.
Yeah.
They laid the groundwork for future success.
Exactly. This illustrates how a well-chosen proximate objective can unlock progress and momentum for an entire project. It's about choosing the right battles to win the war.
Okay, let's move on to Chapter 11, Chains That Unravel. What's this about?
This chapter explores the challenges of dealing with what Rumelt calls chain-linked problems.
Okay.
These are situations where multiple problems are interconnected.
Okay.
And improving just one part of the system often doesn't lead to the desired outcome.
So it's like a chain reaction where fixing one problem just shifts the stress to another part of the system.
Exactly. And Rumelt uses the example of attempts to improve public education.
What's that?
It's a complex issue with many moving parts.
Yeah.
But often reformers focus on a single aspect, like increasing funding or changing teacher evaluations.
So they're trying to fix a single link in the chain,
Right.
but the problem is more systemic?
Exactly. And these changes often fail to deliver real results because they don't address the underlying interconnected problems within the entire system.
It's about seeing the bigger picture, understanding how all the elements of the system interact and influence each other.
Precisely. And Rumelt introduces the concept of quality matching,
Okay.
the idea that the overall effectiveness of a system is limited by its weakest link.
So you can't just focus on improving the strongest parts.
Right.
You need to address those weaknesses as well.
Exactly. And that can be challenging because it requires a more holistic approach, a willingness to tackle multiple problems simultaneously.
This is a great reminder that sometimes the most obvious solution isn't the best one. You need to dig deeper to understand the complexities of the situation. Okay, on to Chapter 12, Dynamics.
So this chapter looks at strategic thinking in dynamic, constantly changing situations.
Okay.
And Rumelt emphasizes that the more dynamic the situation, the more important it is to focus on those proximate objectives we talked about earlier.
Because long-term predictions become less reliable in a rapidly changing environment,
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to hit a moving target.
Exactly. And he uses the analogy of a chess game. Grandmasters don't try to plan out every single move in advance.
Right.
Instead, they focus on building advantage, creating options, and responding to their opponent's moves.
So it's about being adaptable,
Oh, yeah.
flexible, and always thinking a few moves ahead, but not getting too bogged down and trying to predict the unpredictable.
Exactly. It's about understanding the underlying principles of the game and using those to guide your actions.
Okay, let's move on to Chapter 13, Inertia and Entropy.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about inertia a bit already, but can you expand on these concepts and how they impact strategy?
So this chapter introduces two powerful forces that work against change in any organization, or
Okay.
even in our personal lives, for that matter. So inertia is the tendency to keep doing what you've always done, even when it's no longer working.
So it's the resistance to change the comfort of the familiar, even when the familiar is no longer serving us well.
Exactly. And Rumelt explains how inertia can manifest in many ways. Companies can cling to outdated business models, resist adopting new technologies, or even fail to adapt to changes in the market.
Can you give us some concrete examples?
Sure. He talks about Xerox, which dominated the copier market for decades, but then struggled to adapt to the rise of personal computers and digital printing.
They were so focused on their existing success, their cash cow,
Yeah.
that they failed to see the disruptive forces on the horizon.
Exactly. And he also talks about how banks were slow to adapt to changing interest rates. They were so accustomed to a certain way of doing things that they missed the boat.
So inertia can be a deadly trap for businesses, especially in rapidly changing industries. But it's not just a business problem, right?
You're absolutely right. We see this in our personal lives, too. We stick with habits that no longer serve us, relationships that have run their course. It's a human tendency to resist change, even when change is necessary for growth.
So how do we combat that? How do we break free from that inertia?
That's a great question, and it leads us right into Chapter 14, which is all about focus.
Focus,
Mhm.
right? Like shining a beam of light on what truly matters and cutting through all that clutter and noise.
Exactly. Rumelt brings back Crown Corp and Seal to illustrate this. You'll remember we discussed earlier how their focus on a niche market helped them thrive.
Yes. They concentrated on short runs, specialized orders, and rapid response, the stuff their bigger rivals didn't want to bother with.
Precisely. And by focusing on those specific areas, they developed a level of expertise and efficiency that their competitors couldn't match.
So they weren't trying to be everything to everyone. They found their lane and absolutely dominated it.
Exactly. It's a prime example of how focus can be a powerful weapon against both inertia and entropy. It forces you to make choices, to prioritize, to streamline your operations, and to really hone your skills.
This is resonating with me. It's
Yeah.
so easy to get scattered, to try to do too many things at once and end up achieving very little.
It's a common trap, especially in today's world of constant distractions and information overload. But Rumelt makes a compelling case for the power of focus.
Okay, on to chapter 15, growth. Now, intuitively, you'd think growth is always a good thing, right? Bigger is better, more is more.
That's the prevailing narrative, but Rumelt challenges that assumption. He argues that growth can actually be dangerous if it's not guided by a sound strategy. It's not just about getting bigger, it's about getting better.
So growth for growth's sake can backfire.
Absolutely. He revisits the crown, cork, and seal example to illustrate this. Remember how successful they were with their focused strategy?
Yes, they were a lean, mean can-making machine.
Well, after their initial success, they were acquired by a new CEO who was obsessed with growth. He launched a series of acquisitions, expanding the company rapidly.
And on paper, it probably looked great. Revenues soaring, market share increasing.
But here's the thing. While revenues did increase, profitability plummeted. The company had lost its focus, its coherence, and ultimately its competitive advantage.
So it's not just about adding more stuff. It's about making sure that new growth aligns with your core strategy and strengthens your position.
Precisely. It's like stretching an elastic band too far. Eventually, it loses its snap.
This is a great reminder that we need to be cautious about chasing growth blindly. It's not just about getting bigger. It's about getting better. It's about sustainable growth that strengthens your foundation, not weakens it.
I completely agree. And that leads us beautifully to Chapter 16, using advantage. Simply having a competitive advantage isn't enough. You need to know how to use it effectively.
Okay, I'm all ears. How do you actually translate an advantage into tangible results?
Rumelt outlines 4 ways to leverage your advantage. First, you can deepen your advantage, making it even stronger.
So it's like doubling down on what you're already good at. If you're known for your customer service, make it even better. If you have a technological edge, invest in R&D to stay ahead of the curve.
Exactly. Second, you can broaden the extent of your advantage. This could mean applying your strengths to new markets, developing new product lines that leverage your existing expertise, or even expanding geographically.
So you're not just getting better at what you do, you're expanding your reach, finding new ways to apply your strengths.
Precisely. Third, you can create higher demand for those products or services that give you that advantage. This could involve innovative marketing campaigns, strategic partnerships, or even creating a sense of scarcity or exclusivity.
So you're not just relying on people to discover you, you're actively creating a market pull for what you offer.
Exactly. And finally, you can strengthen those isolating mechanisms that protect your advantage from being copied or eroded by competitors.
So this is about building a moat around your castle, right? Making it harder for others to imitate you or steal your market share.
That's the idea. These isolating mechanisms can take many forms, from patents and trademarks to exclusive contracts with suppliers, or a unique company culture that's difficult to replicate.
Rumelt is full of fascinating examples. Any that really stood out to you in this chapter?
He talks about Roll International strategy with pomegranates. They didn't just sell pomegranates, they created an entire lifestyle brand around them, complete with health claims, celebrity endorsements, and a premium price point.
They took a simple fruit and turned it into a status symbol. That's brilliant marketing.
It is. And he also discusses Teleflora's shift from simply selling flowers to offering a full-service experience, including delivery arrangements and personalized messages.
They transformed themselves from a commodity provider into a trusted partner, offering convenience and emotional value.
Exactly. These examples show how you can leverage an advantage to create value and differentiate yourself from the competition.
Okay, we're on the home stretch, chapter 17, riding the waves of change. This feels especially relevant in today's world where everything is changing at warp speed.
It's more relevant than ever. Rumelt argues that good strategists aren't just reacting to change, they're anticipating it and capitalizing on those big shifts that reshape industries and markets.
So they're not just riding the waves, they're surfing them, using those powerful forces to their advantage.
Exactly. He talks about how Intel capitalized on the rise of the microprocessor, how Cisco Systems rode the wave of the internet. These companies didn't just adapt to change, they shaped the future of their industries.
They saw the opportunities early on and made bold moves to capitalize on them. They weren't afraid to take risks and break from the pack.
Exactly. It's about having that vision, that foresight to see where the puck is going, not where it's been.
It's about being proactive, not reactive, anticipating the future, not just responding to the present.
And being willing to take calculated risks, to bet on the future, even when others are hesitant.
Okay, final chapter. Chapter 18, keeping your head. This sounds like essential advice for anyone facing tough decisions, especially when the stakes are high. How do you stay grounded, focused, and clear-headed amidst all the chaos and uncertainty?
That's the focus of this chapter. Staying clear-headed amidst all the noise, pressure, and hype. It's about avoiding those emotional traps that can lead to bad decisions.
So it's about managing your emotions, not letting them cloud your judgment.
Exactly. Rumelt shares the cautionary tale of Global Crossing, a company that got caught up in the dot-com bubble. They made a series of disastrous investments based on overly optimistic projections.
A classic case of irrational exuberance. Everyone was drinking the Kool-Aid and they got burned.
And it wasn't just naive investors, sophisticated institutions got sucked in too. Rumelt warns against the dangers of social herding following the crowd and the inside view, that belief that your situation is somehow unique and exempt from the usual rules.
So it's about staying grounded, being skeptical, challenging assumptions, and not letting your ego or your emotions cloud your judgment. It's easy to get caught up in the hype, especially when everyone around you is saying, this time it's different.
He also cautions against relying too heavily on recent stock market signals. They can be misleading and create a distorted view of reality.
It's a good reminder that the market can be irrational in the short term, driven by fear and greed. But fundamentals always matter in the long run.
Exactly. And he ends the chapter with a powerful reminder. In a world of noise and uncertainty, maintaining clear-headed judgment is one of the most valuable strategic assets you can possess.
It's like that calm in the center of the storm. The ability to think clearly when everyone else is panicking.
Precisely. It's a skill that can be developed, honed through practice and self-awareness.
Wow, this has been an incredible deep dive into good strategy, bad strategy. I feel like we've just scratched the surface, but hopefully given our listeners a good overview of Rumelt's key ideas.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, his work is so rich and insightful that you could spend hours unpacking each chapter.
Totally. But if there's one thing I want our listeners to take away from this episode, it's the importance of having a clear and coherent strategy for whatever you're trying to achieve in life, whether you're running a business, leading a team, or just trying to figure out your next career move.
And that strategy shouldn't be static. It needs to be dynamic, adaptable, and constantly evolving as you learn and gather new information.
Right? It's about being proactive, anticipating challenges and opportunities, and being willing to make tough choices when necessary.
And above all, it's about thinking critically and not blindly following the crowd or the latest trends.
Absolutely. This book has given me so much to think about. What about you?
Oh, definitely. I've got a whole list of notes and ideas that I want to explore further.
Me too.
Yeah?
It's like Rumelt has given us a new mental model for approaching challenges and making decisions.
And that's the power of a good book, right? It can
Yeah.
change the way you think.
This has been an amazing exploration of strategic thinking. Huge thanks to you for sharing your insights and expertise with us. It's been a truly illuminating conversation.
The pleasure was all mine.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into good strategy, bad strategy. We hope you found it as valuable as we have.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on the book and what resonated with you the most. So drop us a comment below and let us know.
And if you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into fascinating books.
And be sure to tell us what book you'd like us to tackle next. We're always looking for new adventures in the world of ideas.
Until next time, keep diving deep.